Yeah, so I'm Andreas Lange, and I'm also glad to be guest today at your talk series. LVLup in Tallinn is our newest member, and we are a growing federation, which I am managing. This is EFGAMP, which stands for European Federation of Game Archives, Museums and Preservation Projects. And it was founded in 2012 on the initiative of our member in Roma, Vigamus, and also our member in France, it's MO5. And back then I was the director of the Computer Game Museum in Berlin. And we somehow initiated to found a federation which is representing the interests and demands of heritage institutions with this special aspect that heritage institutions which care for our digital heritage, digital cultural heritage, or more precise, our gaming heritage. And so I became the president of the federation, and this is what I'm still be. Even if I have left the Computer Game Museum in 2018. But I continue to work for EFGAMP, and this somehow is was a very remarkable step back then, because computer game museums and institutional computer game collectors weren't that much known in 2012, and of course, if you are claiming to not even open up one museum, but also to join forces and open a foundation, a federation for all of these. This is, of course, a remarkable step, which shows that it's quite a broad movement. EFGAMP is concentrated on on institutional collectors, and also in the European area, and it's meant as a traditional lobby organization, which is trying to advance the conditions for institutional game collectors, and also to broaden the awareness of the impact of digital culture and impact of games for our general culture. And these are very traditional tasks for a federation. In my personal opinion, it's a good time to do this also for game collecting institutions, because most of them are still small, and they need support, and they need attention for their needs and demands. And then it's of course a good idea to join forces and to make your voice a little bit louder. And in spite, we have some of our members were quite old and big cultural institutions, like two national libraries, the one of Sweden and the one of Denmark. And they became members because they have to collect games from their area on the base of their legal deposit law. So this shows that it's not only young institutions, small institutions, which are starting to collect the gaming heritage, but even very old traditional cultural institutions like these two national libraries and we all share the same tasks and challenges. And especially if it comes to digital preservation, we need completely new tools compared to preserving analog, traditional heritage. And we also need completely new strategies. And what I realized in the early 2000s was that the game preservers, which back then almost completely came from the private sector, um, were a kind of avant-garde of digital preservation. The emulation programmers, the people behind MAME, the communities who also set up these big databases like Moby Games and Home of the Underdog, for example. They weren't even aware of their bigger, more general meaning for digital preservation. They did it usually because they wanted to play the games of their childhood, and so they were driven by passion, not by political or scientific strategies. But actually, they pushed the whole sector of digital preservation with their skills and, of course, with their passion and with their openness to do all this work without any material budget. So if you would have created MAME without that passion, only by paying people to program such a program and to care for it, you would have needed dozens of millions of euros. And the emulation community, the people behind these emulators, did it just by passion, without any material budget. And they spent so much skills and time to it, and that's really amazing, and it's so respectful and great what they did. So when I realized that, all of a sudden I came also in contact with the traditional institutional heritage establishment, and so they were very curious what I could tell them, how games be preserved. And because games are the most difficult digital artifact to preserve, because they are whole programs. You can't migrate them quite effortless like you can migrate a text document or a picture. It's a port if you want to migrate a program, and that is of course something which you cannot do automatically, and it costs a lot of money. And so they had to look how to preserve these games without reprogramming them for the new platforms, for the new operating systems. And so they came up with the emulation strategy. And the big advantage for everybody, not for games, for every digital artifact you want to preserve, is that you must not touch the artifact itself. You preserve the environment which is needed by the artifact. You preserve the Commodore C64, for example, or the old Amiga computer and the operating system. And you do this by making a software out of these old hardwares. And then you can preserve these environments which are needed by the artifacts. And there's no difference between a game or an old picture, an old text, which was created on let's say, a C64 computer. And so if you preserve the C64 computer in an emulation, as emulation program, then you are able to preserve everything which was programmed for the C64 without touching it. And that's, of course, an advantage everybody understand instantly, because also in the analog world, the best kind of preserving things is to keep them as they are, not to alter them, to preserve them. And so it's the same idea, but like said in the beginning, you need completely different strategies, you need completely different tools, and you need completely different skills. And so this is meanwhile what the cultural establishment also has understood. And since then, since the early 2000s, the understanding and acceptance and of what was achieved, and which is achieved in the gaming heritage sector is very much broader than it used to be. And in the role of secretary of EFGAMP, of course, it's a little bit more easier for me to spread this knowledge, to create new networks, new nodes. For example, only end of last year, EFGAMP became a member of Europa Nostra. Europa Nostra is the European network for traditional material cultural heritage, castles, old houses, this kind of stuff. And they are very well connected with the politicians from the national level, but also from the European level. And there were a few people in the board of the Europa Nostra who are aware of future challenges. And this, of course, means digital cultural heritage. And so when I knocked on their door and asked, hey, should we maybe have a talk to each other, trying to agree on how we can work together, they were very open. And so it happens that EFGAMP became member of Europa Nostra. And this is one of the examples. I can tell you how the federation is helping to connect our sector, the gaming heritage sector, with the traditional heritage sector on an institutional and rather official level. It's not bound to persons anymore that much, and that's of course the big picture. So because there is also a disadvantage when personal people like the emulation programmers are doing so important stuff without any budget. On the one hand, like I said, it's great, it's unbelievable. On the other hand, it's a dependency, because it depends. The whole system are depending on single people, and if these people will be not there anymore, or must work for money, don't have that time which they are able to spend in the past, then also their knowledge, also their skills are gone. And so this is the reason why now these the game preserving activities are shifting from the private hobbyist sector to the institutional sector. And the founding of EFGAMP is representing this shift quite well. And so it's not happening the first time. If you look back to older cultural heritage, like movies, if you look back 100 years, and then you will also see that the first people who start to preserve the old films were the fans. So the Cinematheque, one of the first institutional movie collecting societies, was mainly founded by a fan of movies in the early 1930s, and only then afterwards became more and more an institutional thing. So this is also very typical, that the first people who understood the cultural value of a new phenomenon were the fans, or are the fans, and only second. The bigger society usually is understanding the cultural impact, and then if the institutions are coming into place, of course you need money. You need much more money, and usually, well, it's not untypical that this is tax money, and so it's reasonable that it took some time, and it takes some time after the fans have started collecting and preserving this culture, that the broader society also is stepping into this area and is becoming responsible as well. And so that's happening right now. That's somehow the big picture, and I hope I explained a little bit also where EFGAMP is coming from and what we are doing.
When I think about our activity, so as we already discussed from the very beginning, like it started from, I would say, it's the same thing, but also from unusual way that during with Andreas, when we met, we started to talk about this situation of pirate games that was actually the topic of the previous lecture last week with Mikhail, and how is the position of EFGAMP with this activity? Because in some way, it's interesting to make, like you were talking about the emulation, which is actually fantastic that we are able to save this, I would say, this knowledge on other devices than the original reader. But in some way, these pirate materials that was produced in the 90s was, we could say, kind of emulation. Like there was a lot of, for example, there was a lot of spectrums that was forgeries. I think one of the most machines that have been emulated in some way was, but maybe I'm making mistake with the term emulation. Maybe emulation is really is more close with like computers. But there was a lot of clones of NES, and but in some way it was the possibility for people to play games and programs that was not able on another side of. So here we are talking about time, but I think there is also geography that to take in consideration. Like some people that can play some materials that needs a specific technique. In some place in the world, at the same time will not manage to play that or to play that games because they don't have the proper materials to play it. So there is a question of time, and in the same time, I think there is a question of space also, and of geography. And what is the? I don't know if there is a position, if it's about a position, but at least your focus on that question of pirate games.
Yeah, so before I come to EFGAMP's position, before I come to my personal position, let me clarify the situation. So emulation means that you recreate a computer system independent from the programs which ran on it, like games. And so if you do it re-engineered, if you re-engineer the system, then it's legal. It's allowed. Nobody. So that's for sure. And it became illegal in the moment where you play copyright protected works on that system without having the permission of the rights holder. So, and if you look to the emulator sites, usually you can only download the emulator there without any copyright protected games. So the copyright protected games, you have to go to other sites. That means that the emulator side is legal. So there is no legal discussion on it. Sometimes, especially Nintendo is going after these emulator sites as well, and then they They argue that there's a little piece of code they are using, which is also copyright protected, apart from the game code. But this is still a discussion, and this is only mainly so Nintendo is very serious about this, but the other companies like C64 or Amiga, Commodore, Sinclair, they are not existing anymore. So there's nobody who felt that their copyright is violated. So somehow we can note that programming and distributing emulators is legal. And then we can also note that if you download copyright protected games for this emulator without permission of the right holders, this is illegal. So now I'm coming to my position, and also to EFGAMP's position. So my position as a curator of a game collection, which I was until I left the Computer Game Museum, was and still is that piracy was a big part of the gaming cultures in the 1990s, or also in the 1980s. And you cannot understand gaming culture in the 80s and in the 90s without looking at piracy. So, and that means, of course, we have collected all these pirated games, these illegal copies, these cracked copies. We don't have destroyed them. We just collected them. They were not the first we have put in our database. These were, of course, the official games, but we kept them in boxes. Because of the cracktos, for example, also the magazines from the piracy people, very cultural, very important. There are a lot of very interesting questions combined with it. For example, these kids back then, it was not uncommon that they came from not that well-educated families. So their parents were not academics usually, but the skills of these kids were unbelievable. Without having learned that in schools, without having studied that, they were able to understand this technology much better than even professionals. And so these are very interesting observations, very interesting findings you can do if you want to understand our recent culture when computer became so important for our lives. If you want to understand the roots of it, then this is a very important chapter. It's not the only chapter, but it's a very, very important chapter. And so I feel responsible as a curator of a game collection to, of course, collect this piracy things as well. And so this is my personal position to this, and EFGAMP's position is pretty much the same, but not really, because EFGAMP is not a collection holder. So EFGAMP must not decide this. So EFGAMP is representing the interests of its members. And so because the members are in charge of how to collect this, how to make this accessible or not, it's up to the members to decide this. And as a federation, we are, of course, listening very closely to our members. And if they say we want to make it better accessible, but we have legal restraints, for example, then of course we are becoming active and trying to advance the legal situation. And so that's our position as a federation in regards of the piracy topic. And of course, one other very general comment I have to do, and this is somehow connected to what I told before in my first statement, that if the responsibility of preserving the gaming heritage is shifting from the private sector to the institutional sector, this also means that the legal question became more important. As a private person, somehow I can risk, or I can decide it on my own if I put up illegal games on my site or not. So, but as an institution, I cannot decide that easily. Yeah, and so that means that the more institutions becoming responsible for preserving a gaming heritage, the more the legal situation becomes important. And so this also is the explanation of one of our activity streams we are doing. And this is, of course, trying to advance the legal situation for our members. And there is a very concrete discussion or a movement or development going on in the frame of the DSM directive of the European Union. That's a big copyright update they are just doing. And this must be implemented in the national copyright laws of the member states until next summer. And there's one very important area. It's the out of commerce works area. And as you know, and as everybody of the audience can imagine, in the collections of computer game preserving institutions, and also, of course, private collections of computer games, there are a lot of out of commerce works, much more than in other cultural areas, because the right holders consider a game being old much quicker than a book, for example, is considered being old by the rights holder of the book or the movie. We read old books still. We watch old movies still. But in the gaming area, the rights holders usually don't expect the game being played which is older than 5 or 10 years. And so that means these games are not available anymore commercially. And for these out of commerce works, special rules are foreseen within that DSM directive. And to make it short, it will be possible to make your games in your collection publicly available, accessible, if they are not being sold commercially right now. You are not allowed, you will not be allowed to earn money with it. So it's only for non-profit purposes. And there are some other conditions which have to be fulfilled. But in principle, this will be a huge step further in regards of giving access to the gaming collections. And so EFGAMP is a registered stakeholder in that stakeholder dialogue around setting up the out of commerce works portal. The responsible body of the European Union is the EUPO organization. It's a copyright organization of the European Union, and they are setting up this portal right now. They ask us as federation to give them input to help them making the whole thing compatible with gaming heritage, compatible with gaming collectors, and compatible with game IP right holders. And so that's what's going on right now. We are invited to participate in technical meetings, for example, in Brussels in the EUPO office, but also online. We are participating, giving our input, and then, of course, hoping that the outcome will be practical, will be compatible with the needs of our members. And so these kind of activities will become more and more important. And for these kind of activities, you need a federation, because you cannot expect that the EUPO is calling all of our members, ask their opinion, and then trying to find a compromise. So that's our job, to build a position in the membership, and then telling this position to the responsible policymakers, and trying to make the best out of it, and trying to advance the conditions for collecting this the gaming heritage.
One of the, well, there was many reasons connected, but I don't know if maybe you know one person called Marc Terrien. Marc Terrien is from, he's a researcher in Canada. He's mostly known for his writings about PC Engine. And I don't know him personally, but I found he wrote, I forgot if it was like retranscription from a talk, or if it was an article like about how that games and devices from 80s, 90s, even earlier, that we're gonna play to it, and because there is the content of the game in one point, but there is the manner how we play the game, and which is also part of the game in some way. And the program of the game is only a part of it. And there was games like the game design, the gameplay was also with the materials that was provided to play it at the time, where it was the only one that you could use to play it. So it's interesting that today you can play all that games with a PC, so with a keyboard, with maybe the mouse, if it's possible to adjust the settings. You can play also with some copies from the controllers from that time, but not every controllers are developed to be connected on USB. And it was interesting that what Marc was saying is that the way that we're gonna what we're gonna remains from that games are actually what people are explaining how to play the games, like on some YouTube channels, or and it's interesting that actually also this part of these YouTubers will become part of this heritage of the of that like material. So it's also like, I like very much how when we start to think about to preserve game, like how also it's including so many variation of it and manners, and also because I think, as I understood also, like with the other way of how the museum or perspective pedagogy around video games, and also when I see the people coming to visit the museum, I realize that actually people don't have the nostalgia of the game itself, but they have the nostalgia of the time or the period or the place where they were playing, which is also like part of this whole experience.
Yeah, this is a very important aspect or aspects you are mentioning, and I, as a general comment, of course, games are an interactive medium, and that means you have to interact with it. And interacting with it means you need interfaces, for example, to control something and to get a feedback in real time without big latency. And there are screens, there are audio speakers, input controllers, and these are all part of the gaming experience. And yeah, it's completely right. If you don't, the code is not the only thing you have to preserve. But on the other hand, it's also true if you are not able to preserve the code, yeah, you are missing the most important part of it. But it's not the only part. And then to comment a little bit more on detail what you just said. So there are two main areas I want to sort out in regards of these surrounding aspects. And one I already mentioned, this is the hardware, the input and output interface hardware. This is hardware. We are analog beings, so we cannot communicate digital. We need hardware, which is translating the digital into what we understand, and is also translating our actions to control something to the code, which is digital. So we will also need that in the future, and if we are talking about an interactive medium, these are part of the experience. And then there's a second area, and this is, of course, the time, which is also changing. For example, the very early games, if one plays an early game today, the very usual perception is, oh, that's quite difficult to play. It's really hard to master this game. Yeah. And so if you look at back then, nobody complained about that. Yeah. Of course, there were a few games which were famous for being very, very difficult, but the common games were not mentioned that they were difficult. But if we play today, they are difficult, and so that, of course, is the reason is that our culture changed. Back then, only a few people played games, and these people they liked these hard, really difficult games. Today, a lot of people are playing. The casual gaming sector became so big, and nobody wants to have that difficult games anymore. It should be something easy, without a big pressure, and with a lot of fun. But the ambition to master very difficult levels is not that broad anymore today. And so you have the same game, you have the same interfaces, but you have a different perception of it. And that's, of course, something you also must have in mind. And then, of course, there's a third area, and that's multiplayer games, online games. Imagine an online game like World of Warcraft, which we will be able to preserve, and then imagine somebody who is logging in out of in World of Warcraft in 2050, let's say. And what will he see? He will see an online gaming environment, which looks pretty old, of course, but it's still there like it was. He will see NPCs, but that was it. And we know all that the dynamic, the experience of playing an online multiplayer game, of course, is played with other people. Yeah, and so you can preserve everything, but without having these other people in the game, it's a different game, and it's a different thing. So and this brings documentation into the game. So we need to preserve the code. We need to preserve the interfaces, but then we only can document the culture to play it. We can document the gameplay. We can document the discussions around the game at a certain time, and we can preserve these for future generations, that they got an idea what it meant to play World of Warcraft in the 1920s, in the 2020s. And so you need a lot of parts to preserve gaming culture. And yeah, you're completely right. Code is only one.
Don't you think that the fact that the video game being institutionalized in some way, like the fact that, because if I understand now, the fact that video games be protected by UNESCO is not at all a symbol. Like it implies, as you said, a lot of things. That it also implies that if some people want to give access to collections, they could have help and support. It could create, of course, like so like alternatives of to get access to video games, or not only video games, or digital heritage. But could it create like a kind of, because before like the institution didn't care so much, or maybe in terms of in university, or like if you want, you can learn like how to make video games. I have to not forget, I have also one question about conservation, but this will come after that. So is there something that could it create something for the people that like to collect video games or have already a collection? Like, could it create a kind of regulation of to collect video games in the future, or this is more, we are talking more about like to focus, to get to keep attention of this medium more seriously on it, or could it create also like yes, like yes, could it create a situation?
So you are referring to the Art of Coding initiative, right? Yeah, so this is indeed, this is something very, very interesting, and EFGAMP is very glad to be an initiator and also responsible player in the first application of a born digital culture becoming UNESCO cultural heritage. Intangible heritage. This is not the material, not the tangible, but the intangible heritage list. The UNESCO has started in 2003, and so it's a little bit younger and it's a little bit smaller, but it's very suitable for understanding digital culture, because digital culture, in opposite to traditional analog culture, is very much a process. It's hard to say that's the original state. It makes almost no sense in digital culture. Also, the distinction between original and copy makes no sense, at least in regards to the code. In regards to interfaces and so on, of course, there is still original interface and original CRT monitor or a copy of it, or a simulation of it, to be more precise. And so, but I also have to correct you in regards. It's not about that games are accepted as UNESCO intangible heritage. It's the Demoscene,
yes,
the Demoscene, which is not about gaming. The roots of the Demoscene in the late 1980s were in the piracy, gaming piracy community, but then they split from that and became a own culture, programming code, which also cannot be played. It's audiovisual kind of movies, but and it's projected on a big screen, and there are competitions going on since then regularly all over the world, mainly in Europe. And so this is very interesting because it also, the Demoscene also has very traditional elements, like it's necessary that they come together face to face at the demo parties, and also the demos themselves are not very traditional works, because they are not allowed to be being altered after they have been introduced to the public at one of the demo parties. And so that was the idea, that especially the demo scene is very suitable to become a door opener for the whole area of digital culture. And so that was the reason why the demo scene somehow also became the first application topic for a digital culture in the UNESCO area, and also became very successful because it was granted in Finland. They accepted the Demoscene as part of their national intangible cultural heritage. It was nominated only recently in Germany, also to become part of the national German intangible cultural heritage, and application initiatives in other countries are going on. And we expect that also in the future, other national listings of the Demoscene will happen, and then these countries could decide to join, and for an international application for the international list. It will be a long way, but time doesn't matter that much. What's really interesting is the discourse these applications is triggering, and in two directions. It's the discourse in the bigger society that helps to raise the awareness of the cultural impact of digital culture, but it's also very interesting in regards of the internal discourse, because as you can imagine, the Demoscene is a subculture, and subcultures and UNESCO, this is a pair which is not that common. And so these are also very interesting dynamics to look at. And so it's also a kind of a test bed, the Art of Coding campaign for future similar applications. And of course, we all expect other applications in the future coming rather from the area of gaming, because gaming is much bigger than the Demoscene, which is a niche, of course. But that doesn't matter too much in regards of UNESCO, if it's a niche or not. But for the broader awareness of the impact of digital culture is of course important. And so that's why we expect also in the future other applications coming from the gaming area. And yes, of course. So EFGAMP is responsible for handling the international application process. So the national applicants are the Demosceners. These applications has to be written by the communities, yeah, if of this intangible cultural practice, and so it's up to the Demosceners on national level to draft and submit these applications, and they are representing these national applications. But when it comes to the international level, EFGAMP is responsible for connecting these different national initiatives and trying to realize international application. And we can do this because we are well connected meanwhile in Europe. Of course, the Demoscene, even if it's not gaming culture, it's very close closely connected to gaming culture, and also in regards of preservation tools, strategies. You need the same tools and strategies to preserve demos than to preserve games, and that's the reason why EFGAMP was chosen somehow for this role, and that's also the reason why we are very happy to become part of that initiative. And for me personally, attending these conferences and meetings, it's great to have such a thing going on, because it also urges the experts to rule about it. Before art of coding application, of course, we all claimed as well that digital culture is important, and we have a lot of arguments, and but the people we told them, they were free to react. So they most to my personal experience, they were very open, said yes, well done, and I agree with you, but then they went back to their stuff. But if you submit such an application, the experts had to position themselves, because there are only two options: to say yes and grant the application, or to say no. Both judgments has to be explained, and so this is a nice thing at this application strategy, that nobody can escape from answering your request, and create a position for him or herself.
Yes, and also there is something that which is not obvious at first point. It looks like, because when we see that machines and computers, or even the programs that are on floppy disk, or there is a countdown in the sense that that technology is also that's why, like, I understand your enthusiasm in the sense that now there is an attention more, not as a machines made for hobby, but there is this now that most of that machines, they will not work at some point, because oxidations, because the components that necessary to fix them, they are not, maybe they will be not produced maybe in the future. Okay, there will be always some alternatives to change to rethink the system, but there is also this thing that there is a yes, there is it's not just outdated technology, it's not just outdated, it will be outdated like physically.
Out of order, it will become out of order.
Yes,
right.
It will be just out of order. So it's very, when we see, it's interesting. I like to compare also video games and, okay, Demoscene, sorry for the, like, the shortcut that I meant. But when we see on Artfield, photography and video, which are actually video cinema, like mediums which are older mediums than video games already, and still have today some difficulties in front of paintings or sculpture, or which are mediums like video games are not made from rocks, or not made from concrete, or so yes. So I think it's a nice move. Like this would I don't know how far that would be. Do you? I don't know if it's a question what I said, but is there some kind, like in the United States, some kind of, or maybe in China.
You mean
Some kind of similar initiative like that?
No. It's there's no other similar initiative for the moment. So within the context of Art of Coding, we opened a channel for the States and also for Canada, but the demo scene was quite small, even back then in non-European countries, and so we will see if there are still enough game sceners around to gather and to apply for such a listing. But also in other areas, gaming area or Wikipedia, one can imagine that also from these communities, people had come up with the idea to apply for the UNESCO status. It hadn't happened before, and so Art of Coding is the only and first one for the moment. And yeah, but like I said, I think it's a door opener for others, and it's a very suitable door opener because you can describe the Demoscene quite exactly, and you can it's quite easy to define it and distinct it from other cultures, which of course is not that easy in the gaming area, the gaming culture, as you are aware. So the borders between these communities are very, very fluent, and one criterion, for example, for it's a core criteria of the UNESCO is that these cultures has to be non-profit. And now imagine to come up with an application coming from the gaming area. It's hard to define and describe something in the gaming culture which has no connection to commercial context. And so this was one of the reasons why the Demoscene is the perfect door opener. Because it's completely non-profit. That's for clear, and then you can describe it very precisely, and this is very special. And so, in my opinion, no expert can say no, because the Demoscene is matching all the criteria of the UNESCO, and there's only this distinction that the difference is that the artifacts are digital, but that's not an important distinction, and it's not mentioned anywhere in the UNESCO criteria. There's no criteria which says it must be analog or something like that. It's not even mentioned, the material, because it's intangible cultural heritage. So of course, a lot of cultural practices have involved material objects, of course. And then these objects, these analog objects, are of course part of this intangible culture. But the culture itself, and that's the core of the convention, of these UNESCO convention, the culture itself is intangible, and so it doesn't matter which material is used to do that culture, and all other criteria are met by the Demoscene, and so nobody can say no.
And I have maybe other questions, maybe more practical question. Like when you were working at the, so you said that you are one of the founder of the Video Game Museum in Berlin, yes?
A founding director. I was the first director, and
for you, did you already had a guess about this preservation questions in terms of materials, or in terms of, I don't know, like chemi or chemi, like, you know, like reactions with hair and with question of oxidation, or like, did you already, or was it like more like, let's make it open to the people, and and then after the time, because after that time, like, is this question of preservation became more and more serious, in the sense that how to like preserve, as not to just get access, but how
Yeah.
to make that materials fighting the time.
Yeah, exactly. I don't have a archivist background or a scientific background in preservation, so I have a cultural background. And when I was asked in 1996 if I want to become the founding director of the actually first computer game museum in the world, which it became then when we opened early 1997. I didn't thought about these preservational issues. All the efforts, all the attentions, and all the budget were put into the exhibition. Because that's somehow the first easiest way how you can expand the awareness of the cultural impact. Is to open an exhibition and invite people to look at it and to play with it, of course. And then only a few years later, in the early 2000s, I realized this preservation context better and better, and I understood what I am doing, and I stood also our responsibility as a computer game museum, as an institution which is collecting gaming heritage, of course, to exhibit it, but also to preserve it. And but that was a process, like you just also guessed. And only a few years later, we realized that, and then step by step, we were also we became better and better connected with the traditional heritage sector, understood the expert challenges in that area, and then we translated somehow the experiences and achievements of the emulation community towards the traditional heritage sector. And that was our role in these early years. And of course, we also used these tools and strategies, not only for preservation for the future, but of course also for exhibiting. It's if you offer many people hands-on exhibits, if you do it without traditional hardware, of course it will become harder and harder. And emulators help to make the exhibits more solid. And so it's a lot of advancements and advantages. And so we use this achievements and kind of inventions, of course, not without giving credit to the people who created these tools.
Would you like maybe to? Is there something that you think about that that could complete?
Maybe I pick up what you said just before that, when you described the approach of the MoMA. And in that regards, it's important to understand that Paul Galloway is not working in the fine arts department, but in the department for design and architecture. That's a very important distinction. And so that means that the MoMA is games not considering as fine arts, but as design and kind of a virtual architecture. And so in that regards, I think it's, I like this approach, because games can be art, of course. If the programmer perceives himself, herself as an artist, and if they are claiming to have created an artwork, then we all should perceive that as an artwork. And there are arty games available, not only since yesterday, but since many times. But in my opinion, the question is a little bit misleading in the wrong direction. And that brings us back to what we said before, that games are not traditional artifacts, but they are interactive. And this interactive medium, they are an experience. And if they are not played, they are not there. So I think this is really something which is important. This also has a tradition, and a house where no people were living in it, one can doubt if this is still a house. And so there are a lot of parallels. If you treat and handle games and try to understand games from this traditional standpoint of where the MoMA Department of Design and Architecture is, and so I like this. I like to understand these kind of similarities, this kind of parallels, because so if it's a house or if it's a game, it must it only can be understood in relation to the humans who are using it, and so it's completely reasonable that the design and architecture department of the MoMA is now approaching games with the same reasons they are approaching other design works and architectures. And if you have established this common ground, then as a next step, I think it's then possible to look at the differences, to look at on the new aspects games are offering, and there are of course some also very important ones. But in my opinion, that's the second step. And so I like very much this MoMA approach, and I don't think that the question if games are art or not is the right one. They could, but it's not really important to understand games. You can then discuss these very few arty games which are out there. Of course, you can have a different opinion than the creator, or at least you can say, I don't like your art. It's not fun or whatever. Then you can discuss it. But to understand games in general, it's a misleading question, especially because what is art? There is no common definition that plays what art is. So everybody has another definition. You can look at the art market, of course. Then you can say an artwork is art when it is paid with high prices. And it must be good art. That's kind of an objective criterion. But apart from this, there is no common definition. Everybody agreed what art is. And so what does that question mean in regards of game? Nothing. It's so.
A simple one. Art is what the artist doing.
Art is what?
The artist doing.
The artist doing. That's a reasonable definition. It's not the definition of everybody, but yeah, there are some people. And these are especially also very important for the Demosceners, which also it's just doing. And yeah, with coding, with programming, these machines are available for very cheap prices meanwhile. So you can explore a whole world of very important things. And you can start it on your own. And that's actually what how a lot of games and game companies has been started by single people who understood the opportunities which are into this technology. And I think this is a big source of creativity, and this will stay a big source of creativity. But in difference to traditional culture, the participation of a player is needed every time, essentially. And so this pair of a creator and of a player, which also become a creator, of course, depending on the game. But a game like Minecraft, for example, it's about creating things. And so you can't differ anymore a player from a creator. So all these roles are still at place, but they are mixed in a different way. And I think this is not only true in regards of games. This will be true for our whole culture. Participation is a big topic right now, and will be even bigger in the future. And games are kind of a laboratory situation where you can have a look at. And if you understand games, you will be able to understand much more, which is already important for our society, but will become more and more important in the future.
I don't know if it's making echo to what you are doing, but I'm very glad that our biggest, I would say, um, uh, uh, cooperator with the museum are actually some art institutions like the Art Academy, but also we have already different cooperation with the anthropology department of Tallinn University. So of course we have some other partners, but I would say different because in terms of would be maybe sponsors or I would say people like members of the museum, people that cooperate with us, and but yes, it's interesting like to see how the place is driving some other um, specificity or different some of the fields of research that connected it to the to what's with the activity of the museum, and like it's more actually that kind of human science that coming to us than
Yeah.
programmers or than yes video game industry or even like online gamers like or multiplayer games or, and so yes, so that's, I think it's I couldn't know that before. Like I didn't make the museum for that reason. Just I found it out with Andres. We found it out when yes when after this. Okay. Andres, maybe do you have any questions from your side?
Well, it's hard for me to question anything because I had really big problems with internet connection. So I've heard half of the talk, and yeah, I will look at it later. It's just there is something happening with internet connection from my provider. So I even had to switch from a computer to a mobile phone. Yeah, what can I say? I'm really far away from Demoscene. And I was really interested to understand what this art of coding project means, because I heard a lot about it, but I was too shy to ask, what does it mean? Because I'm really far away from all those topics. At least Camille traveled to the convention in Tokyo, and you have at least some knowledge of what's happening. And I'm a bit outside. So now I at least know more information.
But yes. I was in the same situation than Andres a few months before.
Like, yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's something that we all discovered. So as I said, like it was very good. Okay, like a very prestigious occasion actually that to enlighten that. To enlight like the Demoscene from our position and has the museum as a channel.
Mm-hmm.
But I was wondering that maybe okay, and of course, like what was very great with Andres when he started the museum is that Andres was also working with the youth centers, and very fast we had also like this cooperation with this population, and also like Estonia has a very specific social background and
history. Yes, it's quite different.
Mm-hmm. And it was interesting to see that actually like Estonian Russian speakers and has more like very Slavic heritage and Estonian speakers that which are more has, I would say, more European way of life, or I don't know if it's the proper proper description, but that two community have a different culture, different backgrounds, different references, and it's very interesting to see in some points that they have in common, like video games, like they come for the same games, they come for the same for the same reason actually, and I don't know any other place like that in Estonia. Like I learned more about Estonia in 6 months working with Andres in the video game museum since 4 years as artist. In a very also very like it's a niche also art. It's a very big community and it's very interesting that actually this social, I would say, social experience is happened because of there was this. I started this research on video games.
Yeah, so, that's an interesting thing you're just told, that you in Estonia can understand the gaming culture as a bridge of bridging different cultures like the Russian and the Western European culture, which is both in Estonia present. We have a little bit of a similar situation in Berlin, East Berlin, West Berlin, of course. And I have a Western background, but when we opened the Computer Game Museum in the 1997, I also had I met a lot of people telling me about their gaming experience in East Berlin. And yes, that's interesting. And games are a global medium, but they still have connections to national cultures and to other cultural scenarios. And to understand this, that's still an exciting question, and it's also ongoing research somehow. And in spite or on the one hand, so for the Western world, gaming history has been started to be written from mostly American writers, but in the last years, the national perspectives on gaming culture became more and more important. And if you have in your land, in Estonia, which is a small country, if you have two different cultures, the Russian and the European people, and they all played games, maybe the same games, or probably the same game. Then, of course, that's interesting to have a look at how this happened in the past, now, and maybe also in the future.
I started studying all this gaming history long before opening the museum. I was helping one Russian website with the materials, and while reading through all the Wikipedia, all the information, it was mostly American history, like American perception of gaming history. That Atari 2600 is a classic, that NES is a classic, and Famicom. So Japanese market, American market, but for Estonia and Baltic states, we never had Atari 2600. We never heard that name. And NES or Famicom, it's the same. We know Dandy, we know that there was Sega later, and all those consoles that are classics for American market, for us, it's nothing. So at the entrance of the museum, the first machine that people see is Atari 2600 with the games, and they have no idea what's that and why it's so important for a history. So it's quite funny. We at some point installed very close to the entrance this Dandy console that was a Famiclone, fully legal machine, because everyone was like, "Oh yeah, that's the history. That's the legendary Dandy console." And then we explained to the people the Dandy is a clone of this Famicom here, and they're like, "What? A clone? What that means?" So the history here and all this perception of gaming history is totally different. Totally different. There is like, if we will at some point start maybe selling books here about the gaming history, people will not really care about them because they want the history that was from this part of the world. And there is really nothing right now. Like, there are some videos on YouTube, a few of them, but there is no written documentation really. Like, it's hard to find. I was trying my best, even in Russian language, to find really like study materials. It's so hard, even to find the year when the machine was produced, who was the company, where did it come from, and information diverses. That's quite interesting. So
that's your responsibility. You have to write it down first time. So you have to meet the people, the protagonists from the 90s, and then interview them and document everything, and then maybe write a book at some time or put everything online. And that's actually what you are doing. So it's a very, very important job you are doing. Yeah.
And it's quite unique. I understood the importance of this our own history when I met Camille, and he started explaining his childhood and the popular consoles and the Game Boy, the original Game Boy. And I'm like, man, no one here played Game Boy. We never had any experience with Game Boy. We had Tetris from China. It had Tetris. And it's really interesting. Totally different worlds. Like, we lived in different planets. We had
different
totally
markets,
different culture, markets.
It's a different market. So that was the reason why you don't have had all these classic consoles, because you were another market, and you were a market without any copyright restrictions, and that was the reason why they haven't released all these machines into Russia, and so. Yeah, that's the reason of the limitation, I would say, but limitation is not the right word, because you still had played, but on different platforms, on clones, and also the accessibility of the games were different ones, and so there was a gaming culture. There is a gaming culture, but it's a different one, and so. Yeah, but the market, that's the reason. It's not the culture. It's the market which is the reason. So I think the demand for play and is the lust for play is one of the humankind. we all like it in the same way. We play different games, but we all like to play something. And so you have cultural differences, but not on that basic level. On that basic level, every human being who's growing up as a child understands the world by playing, and most of them also keep playing if they are grown-ups.
And now when I talk about that history, I was born when the Soviet Union collapsed in 92. And while growing up, the Estonia was a very poor country, I would say, at least the part of the city I lived in. And all those illegal consoles, we never knew that they were illegal. They were pretty cheap. And the games, you could buy them on the market for a very low price. So thanks to that, I would say pretty... oh my God, my English just left my mind. So the country that didn't have economic possibility to buy original equipment, we as a people, as children, had possibility to play those games thanks to all those Chinese knockoff low quality consoles. The games maybe were sometimes unplayable, but at least we had the possibility to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, so it gave us this possibility to play those games without those illegal Chinese consoles. I think with such a small market and low income of the population, I think the original NES or Super Nintendo, it would be just impossible for us to buy with those pricings. So that's the thing. Even when it was PlayStation 2 era, I remember almost all of my friends and me, myself, we played PlayStation 1. We were always behind, a generation behind, because we didn't have enough money and possibility to play the PlayStation 2 games. And when PlayStation 3 came, we just adjusted to PlayStation 2. So we were always behind. And now I see that Estonia, even with 1 million people, we start to adjust to the times. Now everyone is in time with the other countries, with America, with Japan, with Europe. But just like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we were always a bit behind in the market space. So we were one generation behind. And that's quite interesting. We're always just a bit in the past with our technology that was popular on the market here.
Yeah.
Andreas, is people with video games is the games were translated in German or not, as it was in France?
What word?
Is video games were translated in German in
Videospiele. Localized. You mean localized?
Yes.
Yeah, that's happening quite often because the German market is a big market, and so usually it's the IP holders worth to spend some extra money for a German localization. If they can sell it there better in Germany, then it's reasonable for them. Yeah.
It's funny that there was this Nintendo, Sega, and some other brands made these mini consoles, these mini machines, and it's very funny that in France the main critic was that it was not translated in French.
Yeah, but that's of course a little bit the difference between France and Germany. So since we lost the Second World War and all this Nazi stuff, we have a difficult relationship to our nationality, while the France are much more could be much more proud of their nationality, and so.
But that's to make one remark that I found out recently. It's that you agreed that there was a kind of players that was like very considered as the hardcore ones, or like that was the one that got a Famicom with the original Japanese game. that were able to play, like the very original version, even if they were not speaking Japanese. The ones that get that machines, they were like untouchables. But what I found here is that actually it's so funny that mainly when after Soviet Union collapsed, like very early in the 91, 92, all the pirate games that I found out here, it's actually a lot of compilations, but I mostly found out that first pirate machines can read original Famicom games, but people here was playing on original versions of the games. So it's very
the Japanese.
Yes, the Japanese versions. So it's very interesting that actually they were playing had like lower materials, like low quality material lately, but they were playing on games that was absolutely not translated. But songs were translated, but in Russian. And so it's so funny, like how this galaxy of course, consuming, but context create so many different kind of histories and
yeah, that's right.
And the language has a place also in that question.
Yes.
And the pirated consoles. Not the first ones, but after a few years, they all had built-in games.
What games?
They had built-in
games. Yeah.
So quite early, all those pirated consoles, they understood there were many companies competing for the market, and they understood that they have to build in as much as possible. And I remember I was opening all the machines, and some of them had even cartridge built into the motherboard. So it's not even small microscopic adjustment. No, they really like soldered a cartridge inside of the machine. And that's just funny, really. Like I remember I removed one of the cartridges, put inside another one, it worked. And it's great. And all of those pirated machines, not only they had 2 gamepads, the gun, but they even had the built-in library of the games. So I would say we were quite lucky.
Yeah. So collect these cartridges, preserve them, and that is a very special chapter of gaming culture. You can provide to the global communities who are interested in understanding and researching gaming culture. Yeah.
One of my role in the museum is to find out the games in the Dandy, like NES clones games don't have plastics anymore around the ship, and so we have tons of that ship without anything written. Just like standalone graphics of that. Trying to put it inside the machine and trying to make it work to see finally what is on the screen. So we have a big collection of that games.
Very good.
Sometimes it's Mario 9, sometimes Mario 11, Mario 27, Mario 30, 40. I don't know how many there were, but the last one I remember is 48, I think. Mario 48. They're really fun, really, and so much fun to see what's happening there. It's just like creativity of people is.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care of you.
Yeah, you too. Then goodbye to Tallinn. Bye bye.
Ciao.